7 positive things the pandemic has given us. 2020 has been a year that nobody expected. Coronavirus has seen many of us shut away in our houses, homeschooling our children, and wearing masks on a daily basis. Others have had to deal with its destruction head-on, be it through personal losses or working on the front line. There's no denying this year has been both difficult and life-changing for all of us. However, there has been some unlikely benefits to come from it too. So, aside from finding a newfound love of baking banana bread and being able to work in our pyjamas, what other positives has the pandemic given us? Number 1. We've proven major changes are possible to save our planet. We've been encouraged by climate change experts for years to bike or walk to get around. But it wasn't until the quarantine struck that so many of us embraced 2 wheels or a daily stroll. Halfords have reported bicycle sales are up 59% from last year, and many people have continued to keep biking as the years progressed. Even with cars still being driven during the spring lockdown, roadside pollution levels of nitrogen dioxide fell by almost 56%, according to a study by the University of York. Traffic congestion in most urban areas is often named as the reason why roadside emissions have been at a legal level since 2010. Yet post-lockdown, even once people were permitted to return to the workplace, the Department of Transport say both the morning and evening rush hours had almost disappeared. Speaking to The Guardian, Dr. David Carslaw from the University of York predicts that even if we keep these traffic pollution levels down by 10 to 20%, it would have a disproportionately positive effect on our air quality in the future. The pandemic has also had a huge impact on our air travel. According to Statista, those taking a flight from the UK is still down by almost 66%. Additional lockdowns are expected to increase that number further. Pre-COVID-19, despite awareness on the negative impact air travel has on our environment, passenger aviation continued to see a steady year-on-year growth. However, this year, the aviation industry's carbon footprint has more than halved. All of these transport changes combined meant that peak lockdown carbon dioxide emissions were down by 17% globally compared to last year's. This decline in air pollution is unprecedented and means the fight against climate change is temporarily given a huge boost. However, scientists warn that urgent continued action needs to be taken if the UK government is to meet their 2050 target of cutting greenhouse gases to net zero. Larger corporations across the world must also make drastic changes as well. The top 20 offending companies are responsible for 35% of the world's greenhouse emissions alone. However, there is hope there too. China, the world's worst country for emitting CO2, has revealed plans for a green recovery, following the huge improvements they saw in their environment during the lockdown. The pandemic has afforded us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see what's possible in improving our environment. Speaking at a global conference for climate change, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres put it most succinctly. Quite simply, how the world recovers from COVID-19 is a make-or-break moment for the health of our planet. Number 2, increased helpline hours for victims of domestic abuse. The lockdown and repercussions of the pandemic have meant this is an extremely dangerous time for domestic abuse victims. Since the lockdown began, the charity Refuge have reported over 40,000 calls to their helpline, and the website has received an 800% increase in visitors. For victims who are constantly watched by an abuser, finding a time where they can get in touch with someone and ask for help is often very difficult. The National Centre for Domestic Violence found, with their staff having to work from home during lockdown, they were able to extend their call centre hours by 50%. The award-winning service offers free legal aid to victims of domestic abuse who need an emergency court injunction. NCDV's CEO, Mark Groves, says now their team isn't confined to working in the office, they can also consider taking on more people. An extra 10 staff members would have previously meant the costly move to a larger venue. Now the staff are content to stay at home. NCDV can now look into taking on extra support and use their old offices as a training centre. Women's Aid also had to redeploy their team to work at home. They found that without having to travel into the office, their staff were able to offer more hours to the service. And along with emergency funding and donations, they were able to increase their online chat box from 2 hours in the morning, Monday to Friday, to 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day of the week. Women's Aid have since been able to continue the extra hours, but say further funding and donations are vital to keep it going. While extra opening hours are just a small step to help people who are being abused, creating more opportunities for victims to make the first contact could ultimately mean the difference between life or death. Number 3. Homegrown businesses have been given a chance to thrive. With many people confined to their homes and finding themselves without work, lockdown has given some people the time to develop new ways of earning a living. According to research from Direct Line, 1 in 5 small businesses launched a new service online during lockdown, with nearly 65% feeling optimistic about their success. Born from its owner being at home more during the spring lockdown, Dicky Doodah Bakes was created. It initially offered a Say It With Scones service, which saw homemade scones delivered to loved ones' front doors. DDB owner Amy Dickinson says the first week of lockdown she had bookings for 6 to 7 houses. By the third week, she was doing multiple runs, serving up to 30 homes at a time. Notes and messages accompanying the scones reading things like, "We miss you, Granny and Grandpops. To my NHS hero, thank you. And happy birthday. Hope these lockdown scones make you smile." Amy then turned her attention to baking birthday cakes. While learning a new way to be creative, Amy says there were lots of late-night online shopping for baking tools and watching YouTube tutorials on how to pipe icing. Using social media as a way of promoting her new business, bookings for her cakes have now taken off too. Over 100 have already been created, along with 1,897 scones. Amy says if it wasn't for COVID-19, she doesn't believe Dicky Doodah Bakes would have been even half as busy. Husband and wife, Shane and Martine Canning, were able to establish 2 businesses during the lockdown. As restrictions eased over the summer, they understood that many people preferred to stay in their own houses. So they launched My Home Cinema and Tea Parties Essex. The services offer entertainment and party options for people while still maintaining social distancing rules. Celebrities, including TOWIE cast members, have already used the service. Owner Martine says that the response to their businesses has been really positive, adding that while lots of people aren't quite ready to go to the cinema, they've said how great it's been to enjoy the experience at home. While the Cannings continue to juggle their regular jobs and parent their 3 children, they intend to keep their homegrown business too. Christmas teepee parties have also now been added to their list of services. Understandably, the pair say that despite having the equipment before the lockdown, they didn't have the energy needed to invest in a new business, but the pandemic proved a perfect time to get started. Like them, 3/4 of small businesses surveyed by Direct Line say they now intend to continue their online services or products for the long term, with many saying that it was the pandemic that pushed them to develop their businesses. Number 4, it's given local radio a chance to fight back. On the 1st of September, along with 49 other local radio stations, Yorkshire Coast Radio was taken over by Bauer Media and rebranded as Greatest Hits Radio. While Bowers say they're committed to providing local news, travel and weather, many of the previous station's presenters have found themselves without jobs. The vast majority of the music and content will now be networked, with many of its new radio hosts broadcasting from London. While it's nothing new that local radio stations are often bought out by commercial radio giants like Bauer, surprisingly, the lockdown has given some of Yorkshire Coast Radio's old team the confidence to fight back. Following an outcry from the surrounding community, former YCR presenter Paddy Billington and some of his colleagues decided that there was still a calling for a station with a local identity. Before the buyout, Yorkshire Coast Radio was performing well. The previous year's figures from Radar showed YCR reached over 53% of listeners weekly, which was higher than any other local station in England. But presenter Paddy said it was the lockdown that really rejuvenated people's love for local radio. Many people were at home self-isolating, some were scared, and they were looking for local information and familiar voices to provide entertainment. The strict lockdown measures also meant the YCR team had to broadcast from home rather than the equipped studios, a feat they previously wouldn't have thought possible. We assumed the cost would have been too much. We soon found we could produce and broadcast as we would in the studio. Within days of announcing that some of the former Yorkshire Coast team would be going at it alone, they'd raised £11,000 of a £10,000 target to set up a new station. This Is the Coast was launched on the 5th of October, online, on their app and on DAB radio, and is going from strength to strength. And it seems they're not the only ones. York Mix website has announced it will be launching its own station, utilising some of the presenters from Minster FM, who also lost their jobs during the takeover. Similar online stations have been launched in West Yorkshire too. Could this be the turnaround the industry needs to ensure the future of local radio? Number 5. Companies embracing the 4-day working week. It's been part of the Green Party's policy for years. Labour included it in the 2019 manifesto, and an independent 4-day working week campaign has over 12,000 followers on Twitter. But it was in June that some cross-party politicians championed the idea further and presented it to the government. The driving force behind their actions, the coronavirus pandemic. The letter, written to Chancellor Rishi Sunak, urged the government to consider the new format of working, in part to counteract the unemployment caused by the pandemic. According to ONS, since March, there are now 695,000 less people on a payroll, and it's still unknown how many other workers will find themselves without a job once the furlough scheme ends. The initiative would see employees having an extra day off, without taking a cut in pay. The emphasis being on increased productivity in their working hours and more spending on their days off. However, critics say the estimated £9 billion of costs to introduce a scheme in the public sector is too much. Yet Joe Ryle, a spokesperson for the 4-day week campaign, says there are plenty of additional benefits from having 3 days off a week. We've seen improvements to people's mental and physical health, more political engagement, and ultimately lower costs for employers. Think tank Autonomy estimate up to 500,000 full-time jobs would be created if the public sector switched to a 32-hour week. The pandemic has already spurred some companies into taking the plunge and committing to a 4-day working week. Supermarket chain Morrison's head office made the change in July, while Target Publishing, Punch Creative PR and the Funding Network are just some of the other companies who've chosen to give their staff an extra day off. 2/3 of British workers polled say they would support the government looking into a 4-day working week. The working 4 days a week be even closer than we thought. Number 6. We fell back in love with Great British Holidays. As we watch the coronavirus cases soar abroad and the government keep taking countries off the travel corridor list, many of us have chosen to take our holidays here during the pandemic instead. The Cornish coastline has undoubtedly been one of the areas to have benefited from our renewed love of holidaying locally. Visit Devon's director, Sally Everton, says they've welcomed more millennials this year than ever before. Although not all popular locations were able to recover from the losses made during the lockdown and the COVID-19 restrictions that followed, places such as the Eden Project have had to make redundancies. But Sally hopes that those who visited Devon for the first time this year will now consider it again in the future, protecting livelihoods and enjoying what the area has to offer. With so many of us reminded during the pandemic of the natural beauty spots closer to home and the economic benefits of holidaying here in the UK, he's hoping it's a trend that's here to stay. Number 7. The UK's first ever drive-through horror maze. Festival is the brainchild of Cyclone Event Management, who this year had to come up with an alternative to their walk-through live-action horror mazes. The fully immersive experience is to be held in Oswestry Showgrounds until the end of November, but this year attendees will be in the safety of their own cars as they drive through a maze of scenes from popular horror films. Managing Director Sam Folks is keen to assure it's a COVID-safe attraction. The event is completely contactless, but even so, all our actors will have face masks on underneath their horror masks while you watch the event in the comfort of your car. The maze, which will feature live effects, strange creatures and plenty of scares in the dark, was created after the father and son events team faced so many cancellations due to the pandemic. The team have also created a family-friendly version of the event, minus the scares and effects for children to enjoy too. For those who are attending the full version, you are warned. No matter how scary the maze gets, there's no escaping until you get through to the end.